Washington, that we're going to inform the people in detail on the issues through an electronic town hall so that they really know what's going on. They will want to do what's good for our country. Now, all these fellows with $1,000 suits and alligator shoes running up and down the halls of Congress that make policy now, the lobbyists, the PAC guys, the foreign lobbyists and what have you, they'll be over there in the Smithsonian, you know, because we're going to get rid of them. And the Congress will be listening to the people, and the American people are willing to have fair, shared sacrifice. They're not as stupid as Washington thinks they are. The American people are bright, intelligent, caring, loving people who want a great country for their children and grandchildren. And they will make those sacrifices. So I welcome that challenge, and just watch. Because if the American people send me there, we'll get it done. Now, everybody will faint in Washington. They've never seen anything happen in that town. This is a town where the White House says Congress did it, Congress says the White House did it, and I'm sitting there and say, well, who else could be around? You know, then when they get off by themselves, they said nobody did it. And yet the cash register is empty, and it used to have our money, the taxpayers' money, in it, and we didn't get the results. No, we'll get it done. We'll have to cheat.
Governor, 1 minute.
Ross, that's a great speech, but it's not quite that simple. I mean, look at the facts. Both parties in Washington, the president and the Congress, have cut Medicare. The average senior citizen is spending a higher percentage of income on health care today than they were in 1965 before Medicare came in. The president's got another proposal to require them to pay $400 a year more for the next 5 years. But if you don't have the guts to control cost by changing the insurance system and taking on the bureaucracies and the regulation of health care in the private and public sector, you can't fix this problem. Costs will continue to spiral. And just remember this, folks, a lot of folks on Medicare are out there every day making the choice between food and medicine. Not poor enough for Medicare, Medicaid, not wealthy enough to buy their medicine. I've met them, people like Mary Annie and Edward Davis in Nashua, New Hampshire, all over this country. They cannot even buy medicine. So let's be careful. When we talk about cutting health care costs, let's start with the insurance companies and the people that are making a killing instead of making our people healthy.
1 minute, President Bush.
Well, first place, I'd like to clear up something, because every 4 years, the Democrats go around and say, hey, Republicans are going to cut Social Security and Medicare. They started it again. I'm the president that stood up and said, don't mess with Social Security. And I'm not going to, and we haven't. And we are not going to go after the Social Security recipient. I have one difference with Mr. Perot on that, because I don't think we need to touch Social Security. What we do need to do, though, is control the growth of these mandatory programs. And Ross properly says, okay, there's some pain in that. But Governor Clinton refuses to touch that, simply refuses. So what we've got to do is control it to the growth, let it grow for inflation, let it grow for the amount of new people added, population, and then hold the line. And I believe that is the way you get the deficit down, not by the tax and spend program that we hear every 4 years, whether it's Mondale, Dukakis, whoever else it is. I just don't believe we ought to do that. So hold the line on Social Security and put a cap on the growth of the mandatory program.
New question. It is for Governor Clinton. 2 minute answer. Sandy will ask it.
Governor Clinton, Ann Compton has brought up Medicare. I remember in 1965 when Wilbur Mills of Arkansas, the chairman of Ways and Means, was pushing it through the Congress. The charge against it was it socialized medicine. One,
Mr. Bush made that charge.
Well, he served with him two years later in 1967, where I first met him. The second point, though, is that it is now skyrocketing out of control. People want it. We say it's going bonkers. Is not the Oregon plan applied to Medicaid rationing the proper way to go, even though the federal government last August ruled that violated the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990?
Well, I thought the Oregon plan should at least have been allowed to be tried, because at least the people in Oregon were trying to do something. But let me go back to the main point, Sandy. Mr. Bush is trying to run against Lyndon Johnson and Jimmy Carter and everybody in the world but me in this race. I have proposed a managed competition plan for health care. I will say again, you cannot control health care costs simply by cutting Medicare. Look what's happened. The federal government has cut Medicare and Medicaid in the last few years. States have cut Medicaid. We've done it in Arkansas under budget pressures. But what happens? More and more people get on the rolls as poverty increases. If you don't control the health care costs of the entire system, you cannot get control of it. Look at our program. We set up a national ceiling on health care costs tied to inflation and population growth set by health care providers, not by the government. We provide for managed competition, not government models, in every state, and we control private and public health care costs. Now, just a few days ago, a bipartisan commission of Republicans and Democrats, more Republicans than Democrats, said my plan will save the average family $1,200 a year more than the Bush plan will by the year 2000. $2.2 trillion in the next 12 years, $400 billion a year by the end of this decade. I've got a plan to control health care costs, but you can't just do it by cutting Medicare. You have to take on the insurance companies, the bureaucracies, and you have to have cost controls, yes, but keep in mind, we are spending 30% more on health care than any country in the world, any other country. And yet we have 35 million people uninsured. We have no preventive and primary care. The Oregon plan is a good start if the federal government's going to continue to abandon its responsibilities. I say if Germany can cover everybody and keep costs under inflation, if Hawaii can cover 98% of their people at lower health care costs than the rest of us, if Rochester, New York can do it with 2/3 of the cost of the rest of us, America can do it too. I'm tired of being told we can't. I say we can. We can do better, and we must.
President Bush, 1 minute.
Well, I don't have time in 30 seconds or whatever minute to talk about our health care reform plan. Oregon plan made some good sense, but it's easy to dismiss the concerns of the disabled. As president, I have to be sure that those waivers, which we're approving all over the place, are covered under the law. Maybe we can work it out. But the Americans for Disabilities Act, speaking about sound and sensible civil rights legislation, was the most foremost piece of legislation passed in modern times. And so we do have something more than a technical problem. Governor Clinton clicked off the things that you got to take on insurance companies and bureaucracies. He failed to take on somebody else, the malpractice suit people, those that bring these lawsuits against these frivolous trial lawyers' lawsuits that are running the cost of medical care up by 25 to 50 billion. And he refuses to put anything controls on these crazy lawsuits. If you want to help somebody, don't run the costs up by making doctors have to have 5 or 6 tests where one would do for fear of being sued, or have somebody along the highway not stop to pick up a guy and help him because he's afraid a trial lawyer will come along and sue him. We're suing each other too much and caring for each other too little.
Mr. Perot, 1 minute.
We got the most expensive health care system in the world, ranks behind 15 other nations when we come to life expectancy, and 22 other nations when we come to infant mortality. So we don't have the best. Pretty simple, folks. If you're paying more and you don't have the best, if all else fails, go copy the people who have the best who spend less, right? But we can do better than that. Again, we've got plans lying all over the place in Washington. Nobody ever implements them. Now I'm back to square one. If you want to stop talking about it and do it, then I'll be glad to go up there and we'll get it done. But if you just want to keep the music going, just stay traditional this next time around. And this 4 years from now, you'll have everybody blaming everybody else for a bad health care system. Talk is cheap. Words are plentiful, deeds are precious. Let's get on with it.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. That was, in fact, the final question and answer. We're now going to move to closing statements. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes. The order, remember, was determined by a drawing, and Mr. Perot, you were first.